Well, that's just not right. Hey guys, welcome to Elevated Systems. I'm your host CJ. Today, I'm going to be reviewing this Cougar Panzer Max-G full tower PC case. Now, I normally wouldn't dedicate an entire video to just a case review. However, in doing my due diligence when I'm looking for a case, I searched for reviews on the cases I was considering, and I wasn't able to find any videos on this case. Or was I? Understandable, it was released just last month. Or was it? So with no reviews, I decided I'd do one for anyone else considering this case. So let's get right to it. Starting with form and function, this is a full tower case measuring in at 266 millimeters wide by 612 millimeters high and 566 millimeters long, or about 10.4 by 24 by 22.2 inches. The chassis is constructed from black powder-coated steel, probably 22 or 23 gauge, considering a thickness of 0.030 inches, including the powder coat. The chassis is further reinforced with steel and plastic rail that surrounds all four edges of the case on both left and right sides. The black chassis is contrasted by the gunmetal gray and carbon fiber accents on this rail. Additionally, there are two steel reinforced plastic handles on the top of the case with a reported capacity of 35 kilograms or 77 pounds. I found the handles well constructed and robust enough to lift and transport the case complete with components. There is also an included headphone hanger that can be installed. There is very little flex in the case even with all the panels removed, and despite the steel being a little thin for this price point, the case is well constructed. The case stands on two single-piece plastic feet with anti-skid rubber foot pads. There is ventilation support at the bottom of the case for the PSU, covered with a magnetically attached dust cover. However, there is less than an inch of clearance at the bottom of the case, including some small cutouts on the rail for airflow. This could be an issue if the case is set on a soft surface like a mat or carpet. The front panel is honeycomb style steel mesh. The 3mm hexagonal holes allow for ample airflow. The front panel is easily removed by simply pushing in at the top corners to release the spring-loaded retention clips. The back of the panel is covered with a fine mesh screen for dust filtration. There are two removable covers for optional access to the two 5 1/4 drive bays. There is approximately 35 millimeters of space behind the panel to install up to three 120 millimeter or three 140 millimeter fans, or up to a 360 millimeter radiator. Moving up, the front I/O panel includes the power and reset switches, two USB 2.0 ports, a headphone and microphone jack, and two USB 3.0 ports. Noticeably missing is a USB 3.1 Type-C port. Finally, there is a 3-speed fan controller switch for controlling case fans. The top of the case is a two-panel design, where another honeycomb-style mesh panel covers about 3/4 of the top, while a solid plastic plate covers the front portion. There is about 26 millimeters of space below the panels to install up to three 120 or two 140 millimeter fans. However, the airflow on the front most installed fan will be significantly impeded by the plastic cover. Additionally, while there are pass-throughs for fan cables, there is no routing for radiator hoses. Therefore, without modification, it's not practical to mount a radiator in this area. The full steel right panel of the case is easily removed with an integrated latch. A 50 millimeter deep interior compartment houses four toolless 2.5-inch drive trays and two 3.5-inch drive trays. These drive trays are removable with a single thumb screw. 2.5-inch drives are secured with a tension clip and hook and can be further secured with three included screws. 3.5-inch drives are secured with screwless retaining pins or can be substituted for 2.5-inch drives using the four bottom screw holes. There are two grommeted pass-throughs to the basement PSU compartment and two grommeted pass-throughs for routing system cables. There is a large cutout for access to the motherboard CPU cooler mounting plate options. There are also large airflow cutouts at the front, which in conjunction with the air guide directs air from the front fans to the rear chamber for mechanical hard drive cooling. In addition to standard front panel cables, there is a SATA power plug and 3 fan connection cable leads from the fan control switch. With the addition of the 2 included 3 fan splitter cables, you can control up to 7 fans. Moving to the back, we see airflow outlet vents for the rear compartment, a standard I/O cutout, a 120mm fan mount, 8 PCIe expansion slots, and a standard ATX power supply cutout. Additionally, there are 3 optional punch-out pass-throughs for routing accessory cables or cooling tubing. Supplemental rubber grommets are included. Finally, the left side of the case is covered with a full-size and heavily tinted tempered glass panel secured with 4 thumb screws at the corners. The motherboard tray supports motherboard form factors from Mini ITX through eATX, and the interior supports up to a 390mm graphics card and a CPU cooler height of up to 170mm. There is a removable dual 5¼ drive bay, a removable full-length PSU shroud, and the aforementioned air guide. Below the PSU shroud, there is room to install up to a 220mm PSU and an additional 120mm or 140mm fan. Additional cooling support includes up to 3 120mm or 2 140mm fans on the top, or up to a 360mm radiator. The inside front supports 2 120 or 140mm fans, or up to a 240mm radiator with the 5¼ bays installed, or 3 of each and up to a 360mm radiator with the bays removed. Radiators and fans cannot be both installed in the inside of the case without interfering with the motherboard at the top of the case or without removing the PSU shroud and air guide in the front. So, my impressions. I ultimately selected this case for the form factor and design. Although a full tower capable of fitting the eATX motherboard I'm using in the eventual build, it's not overly enormous. The X399 Aorus Extreme fits well, and while it does cover about half the grommets, there's still ample space for cables to pass through. It's also deep enough to fit the giant 160mm cooling tower I'll be using. There's also more than ample room and options for cable management. I was also drawn to the military-inspired design and the gray and carbon fiber accents. I'd like to incorporate more of these themes into my final build, including some more carbon fiber and some black and carbon custom sleeved cables. That build's coming, so make sure you get subscribed. But will it be in this case? Because now I have the negatives to point out. Beginning with the significant problem of the case arriving with only one 120mm fan, even though the Cougar product information web page not only clearly shows 3 fans installed in the case, but lists them as pre-installed. I emailed Cougar customer support, however, at the time of filming, it's been 3 days and I've yet to hear back from them. Speaking of fans, I'm also disappointed with the fan and radiator support in this case. Although technically you can install 3 fans and a 360mm radiator on top, one of the fans is almost completely obstructed by the plastic panel. Either the entire top panel should have been mesh, or a secondary mesh panel could have been included. So, a 360 AIO doesn't work on the top. That's okay, I can install it in the front. But can you? Now I'll admit, I don't have a large selection of 360mm radiators or AIOs to test here. I just have the one, which is probably reflective of someone planning to build in this case. You have the one radiator or AIO you bought for the build, and if that one doesn't fit, then, well, what's the point? I've tried every which way to get this Endermax radiator fit, but in the end, it just didn't work. I could get the radiator lined up with some of the holes, but then the fans wouldn't line up. I'd say a 360 radiator wasn't meant to install here, except, according to Cougar, it is. Another fan issue I ran into was that I had to remove the rear fan to install the motherboard, and once it was installed, the fan would barely go back in as it bumped right up against the motherboard. This also gives me significant doubts that a 120mm radiator would fit back here. Also, only a 120mm fan fits back there, so if you wanted to use 140mm fans in the rest of the case, you'll need to keep that in mind. Staying with the fan support, if you plan on using the installed fan control switch, keep in mind you can only connect 2 or 3 pin fans to it. If you have 4-pin PWM fans, you'll need 3-pin adapters, which are not included. Some other minor issues I noticed with the case include the PSU shroud stops about an inch short from the back of the case. I mean, if you're gonna make a full-length shroud, make it full length. I'm also not sure if I'm sold on the whole air guide thing. I mean, while it can't hurt to provide some airflow to mechanical drives, I'm not sure if it's really that necessary considering all the space there is in the rear compartment. Finally, although I like the concept of toolless removal of the mesh panels, this case arrived with one of the plastic retaining pins on the front panel broken off, which demonstrates that while it is convenient, it's also fragile. So, what are my overall conclusions and recommendations on this case? Well, I'll start with the positive. As far as function, if you're planning on doing a large form factor air-cooled build, it's a good choice. I have 3 140mm fans in the front, 2 in the top unrestricted portion of the case, along with the rear fan. This provides good neutral airflow. The ability to fit 4 double-slot PCIe devices is also a bonus for content creation or 3D animation workstations. It's also a good choice if you have large storage needs, as I think the 6 included drive bays are well situated. There's also the option for 5¼ inch optical drives, which actually a lot of people still use. I mean, don't underestimate the benefit of BDR archiving. I wouldn't recommend this case for your average ATX gaming system, however. If your build consists of a standard ATX board, 1 graphics card, maybe an M.2 boot drive and 1 HHD for storage, and a 240 or 360mm AIO, well, this is probably too much case for you. There are a lot of great smaller cases for that type of build at a lower price point, and some awesome ATX cases at this price point. Now, the negatives. Ultimately, this is not a new case. This is a 3-year-old case, the Panzer Max. All Cougar did was remove the metal and plastic latched side panel and apparently 2 fans and slapped a piece of tempered glass on the side and charged an additional $25. There are no updates or refreshes to the cases. In fact, the slots for the old panel are still there. I understand retooling is expensive, but it's almost 2020. At least replace 1 or 2 of the USB 2.0 with a 3.1 Type-C. This, combined with the horrible radiator support I demonstrated, means ultimately I wouldn't recommend this case. And while I have built in some great Cougar cases, I won't be building in this one. Because of the missing fans, and more so because the front panel arrived damaged, I'll be returning this one for a refund. So, now the case search continues. Anyway, that's it for today's video. I hope you learned something. That's always my primary goal. If you have questions, ask, I'll answer. If you like the video, you know what to do. And the best way you can support a small channel like mine is by subscribing. You can also learn more about me and my channel over here. And until next time, have a great week.